What's up, Bitcoiners? Today's episode with Morgen Rochard, author of Quick Start Guide to Personal Finance, is brought to you by Ledn.io, a better home for your Bitcoin. Ledn is a secure, simple, and easy-to-use platform for managing and growing your digital wealth with industry-best interest rates on savings. Use your Bitcoin as collateral for loans or double your Bitcoin stack with their Buy 2X program. And Ledn raises the bar for transparency in the industry with proof of reserves attestation. Not yet a Ledn client? Start earning 9% APY on your USDC and 6.1% APY on your first 2 Bitcoin. Listeners of the Bitcoin Matrix podcast get an exclusive offer of $50 free in USDC when you become a Ledn user and take out a Ledn loan using our link. Learn more, sign up, and get earning at start.ledn.io/Bitcoin Matrix. And now, let's enter the Bitcoin Matrix with Morgen Rochard, where we talk about financial planning, risk management, and how many chairs you should own.
What is real? How do you define real?
You can't jump into cash. Cash is trash. What do? You get out.
Morgen Rochard is a certified financial advisor, certified financial planner, registered life planner, podcaster, founder of Origin Wealth Advisors, and the author of Personal Finance, the Simplified Beginner's Guide to Eliminating Financial Stress, Building Wealth, and Achieving Financial Freedom. At Origin, Morgen focuses on driving personal connections and getting to the root of the financial success of her clients. This is a natural extension of her mission to help others live their most fulfilled, financially stress-free lives. Morgen's approach is designed to help her clients find peace of mind with all aspects of their situation, financial and beyond. As a registered life planner, her role is to help others truly live their passion. This framework helps clients explore what is most important to them, dive deeper into what they want to prioritize, and remove any obstacles that may get in their way. Before going out on her own, Morgen worked extensively with such notable financial heavyweights as UBS and Merrill Lynch. Morgen Rochard, welcome to the Bitcoin Matrix podcast. How are you?
Thanks for having me on. I'm well. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm super excited to talk to you. I finished your book recently, and it's really a tour de force. It's cover to cover. It's packed with information, and it really covers everything from A to Z when you're looking at your life from a financial lens. But what I really loved about the book is it's cradled in sort of this emotional well-being, or sort of like the psychology of investing and sort of money and getting the most out of your money and being comfortable with money. So I'd love to hear what inspired you to write the book.
Yeah, so I've read several personal finance books, and I mean, I've studied, you named all my designations. I mean, you can imagine how much I've studied, and it's really just the raw textbooks and the other literature that I've read. Nobody ever seemed to really combine the practical of financial planning with the money mindset. You would get a book maybe about money mindset or the psychology behind it, or you can get another book that's kind of strictly financial planning. But it seemed to me that the two need to go in hand, because the only way that you can ever know how to make decisions is by kind of knowing how your mind works and how you can make your mind work for you around what you want in your life.
Yeah. And so can you tell us a little bit about your background before you got into financial planning, just so we can get a little bit more insight into your knowledge and your education and what you were doing before this? Because I think it's really interesting. A lot of people go directly into financial planning, and I'd love to hear a little bit about what you were doing before.
Yeah, sure. How far back do you want to go? I'm just kidding. So I was actually pre-med in college, and
Oh,
I wanted to be a doctor. And then I went and volunteered at a hospital, and I realized that I didn't like it when people around me were coughing. I
mm.
was kind of a germaphobe. And so after changing several bed sheets and having a bunch of people cough on me, I left and switched my major. And but I graduated with a health science degree, but then entered the world of finance in 2008, and actually got my first job a few days before Bear Stearns went out of business. So it was not exactly the best time to be looking for a job, but because of where I ended up landing, it worked out really well for me. I was working on the floor of the American Stock Exchange for a small group of derivatives traders, and they typically were long options volatility. So if anyone knows about what happened in 2008, volatility went crazy, right, because of the crisis. So being long volatility actually helped them. And so in essence, it was actually a great place for me to start, right? Instead of like being, tossed into sort of the frying pan and immediately being laid off, I actually got this great derivatives experience for a couple of years to start my career. And then the firm sort of seemed like, because they were long vol, right? Then vol started to come back in, and it started looking not so good for me after a while. So I decided to switch. But in 2010, there really weren't good trading jobs at that time. It was sort of I was sort of in the middle where you really need to start having an algorithm to be profitable, and they weren't really hiring people to be doing like the good old fashioned trading. So if I wasn't a computer science major, which I wasn't, and I didn't have a program going for me, then I had to either think about sales trading or think about doing something else. And then this job at Merrill Lynch fell in my lap, where I worked for ultra high net worth and investors from Mexico on a large team. And I did that for a while. And then I switched teams within Merrill Lynch to work for French and African clients, doing the same thing, but still a lot of trading, a lot of like complex products and structured products, and really things that are well beyond what I do for clients now. And then after I passed all three of the CFA exams, I wanted to do something more. Like I wanted to be really helping clients, my own clients, instead of helping advisors with their clients. So after a little bit of a push and a shove, I just decided, you know what, I'm going to do it on my own. And I started my own firm when I was 28. And here we are 7 years later. I mean, the firm's been through quite a bit of transitions from then to now. The firm was really focused back then on investments and is now like very planning focused. And I'm sure you can tell that from the way my book was written, was that it's very focused on individuals and planning and helping people really achieve their most fulfilled life with the money that they have. So yeah, I would say that, I guess that would be my background.
Awesome. Just to touch on this one more time before we get into more financial planning, back at what you call good old-fashioned trading in derivatives, can you describe that a little bit? I mean, are you working with like huge mathematical equations and number sets, and are you making quick decisions? Is it fast-paced? And I know that I'm asking specifically before the algorithms came in and when it was more human to human.
Yeah, so it was like really what you think of when you watch a movie like Trading Places. It was men in a crowd wearing jackets, yelling, making decisions on the fly about what they thought the price should be. I mean, granted, it wasn't like really the good old fashioned days where you actually did all the math in your head. I mean, you had a program in front of you kind of showing what the market should be and how you can change, like how the market was changing based on the price of the underlying stock. I did all equity options as far as my derivatives trading. So and yeah, there's a Black-Scholes model associated with that. And like I had a computer program that helped me with that. But then still, right, if you're in the crowd and you're yelling out a market, right, and the market changes, you're not looking at your computer screen. You're sort of going on a feeling, which is, I mean, I wouldn't say that's the best thing to do when you're going up against algorithms, right? You don't necessarily want to be going on a feeling, but you have to be able to do quick math in your head, and be able to make a market that, is anywhere between 5 cents to a quarter wide, depending on what was going on. So.
Yeah. It seems like your approach to financial planning is about reducing stress, building wealth, and increasing financial freedom. Are clients usually coming to you during a time of great change in their lives?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say transitions is probably the number one reason why people come through. And a transition can be anything from getting married, having a kid, to You get a windfall for whatever reason, whether it be like a settlement from something or somebody unfortunately passes away in your family and you get a settlement from that, or wanting to do a career change or having just been through a career change, not knowing how the numbers might work out. These are typically reasons why I see people reach out to a financial planner. Other things I see though is I haven't looked at my money in so long and I just need somebody else to handle it, right? Like that's also pretty common is people who are just like, I'm really not doing anything with my money and I know I need to be doing something. And then there's the third sleeve of people who really just want somebody else to, I guess I would say, affirm their decisions, right? You're already on the right track, but it kind of helps to have somebody who's objective, who can look at your financial situation and say, yes, what you're doing is actually right. Or, hey, no, actually, maybe you want to consider these options instead. And I feel like my job is to, A, help the client prioritize what's important so that they even can ask the questions that matter to them. And then B, to give them as much information as they need to then go out and make the decision on their own. So the last thing that we want in our practice is that we tell the client what to do. That's like not what I'm about at all. I'm always about, okay, these are like several options that are available to you given where you are financially. And then, you do what you're going to do with that information.
Right. How do you talk through with your clients how, or anyone, how they can explore or define what their most fulfilled life looks like?
Yeah, so all of my clients go through what's called the life planning process, and it's a series of 3 meetings that it's kind of like a funnel. So the first one is called exploration, and depending on if you're a single person or you're a couple, you'll either meet for about an hour and a half with us or 2 hours. And exploration is designed to be really wide and broad, where we just sort of ask, what would your most fulfilled life look like? And then, anything else, and the whole meeting is kind of like that, where I'm very hands off. The client does all the talking. If it's a couple, the husband gets to do his part and then the wife gets to do her part, or vice versa, depending on who we choose to go first. And that meeting is just designed to kind of get all the little treasures that somebody might have in their life out on the table so that the client themselves is aware, okay, like actually I have a lot of different, things that I might find really important in my life. And then the second meeting is called vision, where we take everything from exploration and we narrow it down a little bit more focused. And we do that through having clients ask themselves questions. We send them a form to fill out, basically, that has these 3 specific questions. The first question is, and this comes from George Kinder, who is like the father of life planning. I didn't make this stuff up. So I just wanted to put that out there and give George Kinder his credit. But the first question is, if you had all the money in the world, what would be different about your life? So not necessarily what would you do, but what would be different? How would your life change? And then the client answers all of that. And then they go to the next question, which it gets a little bit more serious. So you don't have all the money in the world anymore. You have your current financial situation, but time is shorter. You go to a doctor, he tells you that you have 5 to 10 years left to live. You won't feel any pain over that time, but you also won't know the moment of your passing. How does your life change? What are you now doing now that you know you're constrained by that 5 to 10 years? And then the last question takes it even to the next level of even more seriousness, where you go back to this doctor and they give you the most unfortunate news and they say you only have 1 day left to live. And the question's not about what you would do with that day. The question is about, what did you miss? Who did you not get to be? What did you not get to do? And the thing that's kind of nice about these questions, and then you also fill out a grid of other things that are important to you, but these questions really help people when they really sit down and think about these things. The first one's kind of fun, and it brings out sort of the exciting things that you would like to do if you had all the money in the world. But the second 2, because they constrain down time so much, it really shows you what's important and what you want to focus on. So, and I would say really most people should focus on what comes up in question number 2, even though question 3 is the most serious and the most important things will probably come out in that question. Question number 2 is actually super relevant to everyday life. Everybody's life has stages. So whether it be you have young kids, right? They're only going to be young for so long, that 5 to 10 years, yeah, you're not dying, right? But you only have that select small amount of time with them. So I feel like it's one of those things where even though maybe these questions seem kind of out there and, they're not really applicable to my life, it's not necessarily true. If you actually thought about it, it would just be a really good way to prioritize how you're going to spend these small chunks of time.
Right. Yeah, those are very interesting questions and tough. to answer. And I think it gets to, the root of what we're going for. How do you talk? I think we touched on money avoidance a bit at the top of the show. How do you talk to clients about money worship or money status? Wanting money for the sake of those kinds of reasons, or
I think it's a lot easier to sort of preach in a book about, hey, you might have these things, right? As opposed to when you're one-on-one like this, like telling a client, hey, what you're doing is not so great. I think it's sort of one of these, it's like a nice kind of balancing act where you have somebody talk about what's important to them, and then you remind them, hey, when you're trying to go out and get the latest, greatest iPhone, or completely landscape your new property, or get a pool, or whatever it is, right? That stuff didn't come up in your questions. What came up for you is, you want to work by choice, or you want to make sure that you fully fund your kids' college, or whatever it is that's important, or you want to, I don't know, go ice skating around the world because you're a great ice skater, right? I don't know what's important to somebody, but you can imagine, right, that it's really easy to sort of, once you know that kind of information, and once a client knows that kind of information about themselves, then it's really easy to bring that back in. It's what we call relighting the torch. It's reminding somebody what kind of gave them the fire and what made something important to them.
Right. What I thought was really interesting about something outlined in the book is like related to, I think, the first question. If you had all the money in the world and you go on vacation, and maybe you're going to go on vacation for 10 days, and after like 5 or 6 days, you might be ready to go home.
Yeah.
And so to really kind of think through what you want to do with your money, with retirement, and those things of that kind of nature. What is the rule of 72?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I love the rule of 72 because it's just a really easy way for people to evaluate an opportunity cost. So I actually did this on my Twitter today, where I said, if you spent $100,000, according to the rule of 72, that money would actually be, over the course of 30 years, had you invested it, it would be roughly $800,000. So the rule of 72 basically states that whatever investment return you intend to receive, you divide 72 by that number, and that's the number of years that you have left over that will how long it'll take essentially for your money to double. So in that example of $100,000 where it becomes $800,000 in 30 years, the investment return there is 7.2. So I just did 72 divided by 7.2 and I got 10, and that's how you would do the math on that.
Yeah. I think a simple example is like, maybe you're going to get your landscaping done in your backyard for 50 grand, and that's $400,000 over time in your retirement, and maybe think through your consumption in that way. Another great quote in the book was from Thomas J. Stanley: the advertising industry in Hollywood have done a wonderful job conditioning us to believe that wealth and hyper consumption go hand in hand. So to kind of resist that pressure to consume and think about, low time preference and compounding interest. What is the best time to invest?
Well, the best time to invest is when you have money to invest. It's really that simple. I know it's really hard for people to hear that. I think that we get lured by the fact that maybe we can get better returns, right? Maybe we can time the market. I found the more volatile the asset is. So if we're talking about something like Bitcoin, right? The more volatile it is, the less you can time it. And I know that people think, oh, well, it has these 4-year cycles, so I can time the 4-year cycles. But really what happens is that you just become completely irrational about like how fast the price is going to go up. And maybe you sell earlier than you otherwise would, or you FOMO buy into it, or you start panic selling because you didn't think it was going to go down as much as it did, right? We don't really know what's going to be with the future. So, I mean, maybe it's the wrong audience to say that like market timing with bonds might be a little bit easier because they don't move that much, Eventually, maybe they will move quite a bit, but and please don't like think that I'm saying time bonds either. But at the end of the day, right, most people get paid on, let's say a biweekly or monthly basis, or maybe it's quarterly, depending on if you're a business owner or something, where you can set aside a chunk of money during that period of time that goes directly to savings. And hopefully, if you already have an emergency fund in place and you're kind of taking care of some of the little details like getting a 401k match and everything else before you then take the rest of that and immediately invest it, you'll be better off if you stop trying to time the market and start dollar cost averaging over time.
Yeah. And all of this is prefaced. None of this is financial advice. Yeah. We're just chit-chatting about financial planning and Bitcoin. I'm kind of curious about asset allocation. How should one think about allocating money among stocks, bonds, cash, and non-traditional assets like gold or Bitcoin?
Yeah, so it's really dependent on your risk tolerance. And especially something like Bitcoin, I would say I would add other things in there. So I would add, and I would always add this in. So risk tolerance is a combination of your willingness to take risk and your ability to take risk. Willingness is exactly what it sounds like, right? Somebody who's more willing to take risk might be more willing to go skydiving or do something else that's sort of risk-seeking behavior, or it doesn't bother that person as much if the price of something goes up or down. Ability is a little bit different. Ability is actually whether or not you can take that risk. So even if you're willing to go jump off that building and do that bungee jump, right? If you've got a broken leg, maybe it's not the best time to be doing that, right? And the same thing applies to your finances. You can be the most risk-seeking person out there, but if you have $5 in your bank account and you're constantly trying to make ends meet, it's not exactly the right time to then go buy something like Bitcoin. So I would say that that's the first thing that you always have to take into account given any asset allocation. The second thing, though, that goes into ability is kind of your time horizon. So what's that money for? Is that money going to go buy a house in, 2 to 3 years, or go pay for your kid's college in 2 to 3 years, or just something really close in which case then your asset allocation really should be sort of what I like to call asset liability matching, where the liability is the payment you're about to make and the asset is the thing that you're going to make that payment with. And so if that asset is something that moves around quite a bit, then potentially, right, when you go to put that down payment on a house, if the market tanks, right, you're not going to have the money to go do that. So that's generally when you're thinking about asset allocation, it's a combination of all of those things. And then really at the end of the day, like what are you intending to do with this money? So when I work with clients on this, we sit down. It's one of the reasons why we also do those 3 meetings in the life planning, as well as we have several other discussions about like really what is this money for and how are we going to handle it? Because at the end of the day, you want to set an asset allocation to be as close as possible to what you'll need over time. That way you don't have to rebalance so much. It doesn't cause tax consequences. You're not rebalancing at the worst possible time or taking money out at a bad time. All of these things should be taken into account when you're doing that.
Yeah. One of the things I battle with there is, and I have a background in finance as well, educationally and in my career. And I was a very strong believer in diversification. And you asked an interesting question in the book: how diversified do you want to be once you've decided what assets you'll buy, or what you've chosen? My wife really wants me to ask around, like, what do you suggest around Bitcoin allocation, specifically around for a young family? And I kind of my battle there is, historically, what I've seen is great wealth has always been amassed through concentration.
Mm-hmm.
And diversification is great for wealth preservation. But I also respect volatility, and so I'm kind of putting the question there to you. What do you make of that?
I think it depends on your goals, right? And I think it also depends on how much risk you're willing to take, and what that money is for. So if you have a really long time horizon, let's say, I don't know, you're planning to retire in 30 plus years, you're literally not planning to do anything else with that money. You're going to rent, your kids are going to pay for themselves. You have your family members intend to take care of themselves. You have literally no other goals, right? I'm just retiring in 40 years. That's what I'm doing. Then I would say, have fun, be concentrated, right? It doesn't really matter. The thing though, right, that you're putting at risk by being concentrated is that you actually might not be able to retire in 40 years if that one asset doesn't pan out. So that's something to consider for sure. If you have such conviction that you won't sleep at night if you don't only hold this asset, right? I mean, at the end of the day, I don't tell people what to do, but I like to see some diversification from that perspective of like, okay, maybe if we don't put all of our eggs in one basket, things will be okay. I mean, I think also, especially considering something like Bitcoin is money, right? Yes, it's considered an investment. I mean, it's not considered an investment from the SEC's perspective. So let's preface it with that. But it's considered an investment, I would say, by day-to-day people because, right, the price moves around relative to USD. But like, just because a new money exists doesn't mean that the financial system itself won't exist anymore. And I think this is sort of the fallacy of what Bitcoiners in general think. Oh, just because there's Bitcoin, there won't be stock and bond markets. It's just simply not true, right? It'll just be denominated in something else. And maybe it'll change the way we view stock and bond markets today, I mean, I'm not an expert on it, right? I don't know what the future will hold, but I do know that companies will still need to raise money and they will still have a capital structure. And it still might make sense for them to either issue equity or debt, depending on what's going on in that company. So like, from that perspective, right, it would, and I do know also, just based on human behavior, that people will seek out additional investments, right? Even though it's still good for them to have long-term savings like Bitcoin, it doesn't necessarily mean, though, that they're not going to want to seek out other investments and potentially achieve an even higher return. So like, all of that is still going to exist in the future. It might not look like what it does today for whatever reason, but there won't be as many companies or as many kind of really bad investments to invest in, is kind of my hope. Is like, maybe some of that stuff gets weeded out because there's not so much cash sloshing around in the system, right? But there still is a market there.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I think that was great. And one of the things I really like what you point out is that you don't tell people what to do with the money. It's about guiding them through these decisions. And one of your quotes, or I'm quoting you from the book, is when someone recommends an investment to you, they do not know your total financial picture, your risk tolerance, or your intentions. Because of this, they cannot possibly know what is best for you. You wrote that in the book, and I think that's really important. I want to ask you another question: is should investments feel exciting?
Not really.
Right.
I think it's hard to tell Bitcoiners, though, because Bitcoin is pretty exciting, and I get pretty excited about it too. But no, I mean, your investments are like, okay, so if I guess all you're focused on is investments, and you work in, or you're really excited at the industry that you work in and everything else, then yeah, I guess in some regard your investments will be exciting. But for the most part, right, most people, they have a family, right? They want to spend time with their spouse. They want to spend time with their kids. They want to spend time with other members of their family. They have hobbies. I don't know, maybe you like to bike race or ice skate, like we mentioned earlier, right? Or travel. There are other things that people like to do with their lives. So my thought on investing is that make your investments sort of set it and forget it. Make it as easy as possible. Make it something that you don't have to look at all the time, that maybe even sort of acts like paint drying, right? Where you're like, all right, I'm going to deal with this, I'll set it and forget it. And then I'll look at it in, 6 months to a year, and everything's going to be okay. But in the meantime, I'm going to live my exciting life and not worry about my boring investments.
Yeah, I agree there too. I think it should be super boring. Only buy things you never want to sell is kind of what I think about. How do you frame risk tolerance when it comes to the difference between like your risk tolerance on investments versus debt?
Yeah, so they are very different. And I find this always so fascinating that people can have extremely low risk tolerances when it comes to investing, let's say in the market or buying something like Bitcoin, but have no qualms about having like a giant 30-year mortgage, a bunch of credit card debt. And then vice versa, right? There are some people who like avoid debt like the plague, right? And will take on, huge amounts of equity risk. And then there's, combinations of everything else in between. I think that if you've got a low enough interest rate, that debt is fine. Debt, though, to me is kind of like a campfire. And this is something that I put in the book. So fire is great, right? You have a campfire, you can roast marshmallows, you can warm your hands, you can sing songs, you can have a good time. Right. All of a sudden, though, if that campfire becomes a wildfire, right, now you have a problem. It's the same thing with debt, right? If you got a little bit of debt and it's a nice little campfire, it can warm you. It can help you afford a home that you maybe otherwise wouldn't be able to buy. It could help you start a business that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do, right? There are reasons why people would want to take on debt that are good reasons, right? And then there are other reasons why you take on debt that's like living beyond your means, trying to show off, money worship, all of the things that kind of take us down a dark path, where that can turn into a wildfire, right? And obviously that's a lot harder to put out.
Yeah. What is the difference between an independent fee-only advisor and sort of the other financial planners that are out there? And because I think that's important for people to understand what they might be looking for when they shop for a financial planner.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I hear this a lot where people are like, are you fee-based? And the problem is that the lingo has gotten so complicated that people are actually asking for fee only, because so many people are telling them that they're fee-based and then hiding the fact that they actually sell you stuff with commissions. So fee only, what that means is we quote you what you will pay us, and then we don't charge you anything else. So for instance, in my practice, I charge a flat fee based on net worth. At the beginning of our relationship together, we assess net worth. We tell you what your fee is. There's no other fees. There's no fee for buying any kind of insurance. We don't sell insurance. We tell you what kind of insurance we think you would need, and then we help you find somebody who can sell you that insurance. We don't charge any little hidden fees or anything else. Like there's just one fee for all of the planning, and that's what you get. A fee-only planner is going to do that. There's a number of ways that they can do that. They can charge you based on assets under management. They can charge you a flat fee like I do. They can charge a subscription fee. There's a number of ways that they can charge, and they can all be fee-only, provided that they don't sell you anything that they might have a conflict of interest in selling you. So something else that would give them additional revenue that you might not necessarily need in your plan. Anybody else who is not fee-only can do that. So, and they do, because it's just so easy. Like it's like one of those things where if you're a carpenter and the only thing you have is a hammer, right? Everything looks like a nail. But if you give the carpenter a screwdriver, right, they'll be able to do more things. So yeah, I mean, I just think that in the planning world, it's really unfortunate the way it's worked out, but there are some advisors that are fee only, and then there's kind of the rest of us, and not me included in that, but the rest of everybody else. And I don't necessarily think it's intentional for everybody, but when conflicts of interest approach, it's really hard if you're working with an advisor who's trying to sell you insurance and they're going to make money on that insurance product. It's hard to know whether or not you actually need that, if they're going to get another sum of money based on that. And there are other conflicts of interest that could come up with fee-only planners as well. Like if somebody's charging you assets under management, then they have more of an incentive for you to send more money to them, right? Because then they will get paid more. So for instance, they might not want you to buy a house because of it, or they might want you to roll over your 401k to them so that they make more money. So it's one of those things where you have to kind of assess it planner by planner, whether or not you would trust them based on what conflicts of interest they might have.
Yeah, it is serious. My parents are going through a horrible experience now with their advisor of the last 11 years. They've left.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it's been brutal. They have so many questions, suspicions.
Yeah.
So much trust lost. They feel broken. They don't know if something was malicious, negligent, or worse. They're even, kind of finding people to help them, advisors, and sort through that. It's and I think a lot about, the fiduciary nature of that relationship. And I think at the end of the day, you have to own the decisions that are made on your behalf as much as if hopefully you're able to. I know my parents are able to. And so what is a registered life planner?
Yeah, so we're kind of like the weird folk in financial planning. So I would say the difference is that when you go to a registered life planner's office, they are not focused on your money immediately. They are focused on you and your most fulfilled life and what is important to you. And it goes through that process that we talked about earlier, that exploration, vision, and then obstacles, which is the third meeting, which I don't think we touched on obstacles now that I'm thinking about it. But obstacles is basically after you go through vision, you then come back for a third meeting, and we talk about all of the things that could possibly get in your way based on what your life could be like after you answered those questions. So a life planner takes you through those questions and those meetings, and then from there they start traditional financial planning for you. A normal financial planner will not do that. They'll probably have a questionnaire for you. They'll probably still have some sort of discovery or exploration type meeting where they have very guided questions. Whereas a registered life planner is very open-ended. Our purpose is to get you to talk about what you want to talk about, not to force our agenda onto you. So there aren't that many registered life planners, but there is a website. It's the Kinder Institute, and I can send you a link to it so that you can put it in the show notes. But you can find a registered life planner on their website.
Awesome. I think what would be a really interesting topic to talk about right now is common real estate myths.
Sure.
So I'll throw a bunch at you, and you can kind of. So renting is throwing money away. Your home is an investment. Your home is a forced savings account. House prices only go up. They're not making any more land. I am getting so excited for Bitcoin 2022, especially now that they've announced the speakers for the general conference on April 7th and 8th. CEO and co-founder of Lightning Labs, Elizabeth Stark, CEO of MicroStrategy, Michael Saylor, CEO and co-founder of Blockstream, Adam Back, venture capitalist Elise Killeen. Bitcoin 2021 drew a record attendance of 12,000 to Miami, bringing together founders, C-suite executives, experts, newcomers for discussions, networking events, and live performances. For myself, Jack Dorsey's keynote talk was a highlight, as well as the emotional closing announcement from Jack Mallers that El Salvador was moving to make Bitcoin legal tender. For 2022, the conference has been expanded and will include a fourth day for a Sound Money Fest music festival. The Miami Beach Convention Center will provide 5 times the space as the Windward Conference, and organizers are expecting more than 30,000 attendees. Bitcoin 2022 conference, which celebrates Bitcoin over 4 days, April 6th through 9th, with 4 different passes. The 4 days include Industry Day, 2 days of main events and speakers, and lastly, a festival day, which is a day of music and networking. Prices will rise starting tomorrow, September 28th, and over the next few months. So get in early and use my affiliate code for 10% off your tickets. Last year, I got to meet so many Bitcoiners that I met through hosting this podcast or just shitposting on Twitter. Bitcoiners were everywhere, and I'm just so excited to get back to Miami and see everybody again and meet even more fresh and dope Bitcoiners. So when buying your tickets, remember to use the code Cedric2022 and get 10% off your tickets to Bitcoin 2022. You are not going to want to miss this incredible event. And again, remember, prices are starting to go up tomorrow, September 28th. And now, let's re-enter the Bitcoin matrix with Morgen Rochard, where she gets further into the myths of real estate ownership, making big financial decisions, and how to raise financially successful kids.
Yeah, so I get so much. It's like my favorite thing to do on Twitter is to like make fun of people's houses. I know it's a little trolly of me, but it's also, it's so true because people think, okay, like what I'm supposed to do is I'm supposed to go out, I'm supposed to get a job, I'm supposed to start a family, and then I'm supposed to buy a house. And that's what I'm supposed to do. And that's what's financially responsible without checking whether or not to see it even makes sense in the market in which you live or want to live. And that doesn't, I mean, I believe that markets are efficient for the most part. So there's some sort of arbitrage there, maybe, but maybe not. But for the most part, right, what you're doing when you go and buy a house is you're taking money that otherwise would be invested in something, hopefully. And if it's not, I guess that's another story. But the idea is that you're taking money out of the market or out of Bitcoin or out of whatever else you were going to invest in, and then you're plopping it into one investment, which is your home investment in quotes. Let's start there. And then the hope, right, is that that house grows over time with you and it pays for all of the stuff along the way, like your kids crashing into a wall or ruining your carpet, or I don't know, you have a party or your kids throw a party while you're away, right, and they completely trash your house, or just regular basic things like your boiler breaks, things that we generally don't like to think about. Oh, okay, I need to replace the wood on my deck. I have to maintain my lawn. I have to fix a gate maybe, or fix a fence or repaint, right? All of these things have costs associated with it. And just because you put money into this home doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get all the money out of the home, or even better, right, that the home is going to grow in value. What I found over time is that there's a lot of maintenance on homes. Generally, it's 1 to 3% of the home's price, depending on the market that you're in, how old the home is, how many things need to be fixed. And it doesn't necessarily mean that every year you're spending that money. Maybe you spend minimal amount of money and then one year you spend like 10%, right? Or you need to update your kitchen, right? Because if you don't, your house won't even be competitive in that market, right? There are things like that we don't really think about because we use the asset every day. And so I've talked a lot about the concept of depreciation on Twitter, and generally people they don't get that the opposite of appreciation is not depreciation. Depreciation is an accounting concept that applies to assets that have wear and tear, and all assets do have wear and tear, right? It doesn't matter whether or not you live in the home or not, right? That the home needs to be maintained. So these are just things to consider, that there are all these extra added home costs associated with home ownership that are not included in people's budgets. So when you're stretching to the max of what the bank says that you can afford, it doesn't necessarily mean that you could really afford that house.
Yeah. That I really like how you kind of stress that just because if you don't buy, it doesn't mean that you're not building up equity in anything. You can use that money if you're renting to then have equity in other assets. And
Yeah.
I love the trolling on Twitter pointing out how much the landscaping costs or the maintenance.
Yeah, the
on
maintenance. The maintenance is really like the number one thing that people don't consider. And it's like, oh, well, I'll fix everything myself. But okay, maybe though you're a software engineer and you make, several $100s per hour, but now you're spending your entire weekend mulching. Like, I don't know. Right. So, I mean, there are costs, right? Even if you think, okay, well, I went and bought bulk mulch and I didn't pay that much for it. And now I'm spending my entire weekend doing this instead of hanging out with my kids, right? Or coding or doing whatever else it would be that you could do to make extra money. There are costs associated with everything that we do, and there are trade-offs really associated with everything that we do. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't buy a home. You should just be aware of all like what you're getting into, right? And whether or not you actually want to be a homeowner is kind of another thing. I mean, I have a client who's going through this right now. They bought this condo and they're just not enjoying being homeowners. So it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter that they would actually be spending slightly more on rent. Like it doesn't, right? It just they're not supposed to be homeowners because like they're wasting away their weekends doing things that they don't want to do.
Right. Yeah. And what do you make of people who think about, you need multiple streams of income to become wealthy, and owning a rental property will give you that?
Yeah, so a rental property is a business. You have top line revenue from somebody who is paying you rent by you being a landlord. And then you have expenses associated with that property. And so the expenses associated with the property are going to be the mortgage, so the principal and interest on the property. The same maintenance, right, that you would have for your home would still apply to that home, potentially even more maintenance, right, because it depends on which tenant you decide to enter into an agreement with. You potentially have an HOA fee, you've got homeowners insurance, and all of these costs add up. And then any other improvements or things that you have to do to the property, or if you hire a management company to help you with that way you're not like, you're not the phone call at 2 a.m. about the broken toilet, right? So I think that like you have to want to run this kind of a business in order to be a landlord. And what I found with my client base is that some people want to be a landlord and they don't care that this is what they have to do. And they don't even care maybe necessarily that they're not getting compensated for the risk that they're taking. And we'll get into that afterwards. But then other people come to a realization of, hey, I don't want to be the 2 a.m. call anymore. And I'm really not being compensated for this risk. And this multiple stream of income isn't necessarily what I thought it would be. I'm actually putting more into the property than I'm getting out of it, or I am getting something from it, but it's not enough. There are other ways for me to get another stream of income. Simply by investing in anything, you can do that, right? Investing in a diversified portfolio, you're not going to, get the call about the toilet. So maybe it's not as interesting at a cocktail party, but it might be better off for you in the long run. And the other thing I would say about rental properties is right now in the real estate market, just by investing in a REIT, yeah, it's not a leverage bet or whatever, like a rental property would be, but you get 6% easily from doing that. So if you're going to buy a rental property, you have to make sure that the rate that you're being compensated is at least 6% or higher. And I would say because you have an individual property where you're taking on more risk and a tenant and everything else, it shouldn't be like 6.1%, right? We're talking like it should be like 8, 9, maybe 10% is what you should be making on this rather than closer to what a market return would be.
Right. Yeah, I can see that. How do you help people think through whether they should buy or rent?
Yeah, so we go through a pretty long calculator. I don't remember it off the top of my head,
Sure.
but if you go and buy my book, you can get that. But basically what we do is we compare rents for a similar property to what you would pay to buy that property. We then include what we think property taxes would be on that property, what homeowners insurance and maintenance would be for that property. And we give basically our clients what a cost would be. And in that cost for the mortgage, we really only include the interest on the mortgage rather than the principal, right? Because principal is actually going towards the equity in the home. We compare that to what you can get basically in the market, right? If you had taken all those costs that you wouldn't otherwise have from renting, right? How does it look comparably? And by going through that exercise, you can actually compare your monthly rent to what the monthly payment would be on all the other things besides your principal.
Right. What about the emotional quotient of it? Whether, maybe stability for a family, or whether you could be using that money, versus down payment and throwing it into your rent instead of using it for equity.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that at the end of the day, personal finance at least, is not a science, it's an art. And the reason why it's an art is because human beings are involved, right? And we don't always make the most rational decisions, right? For me, like, we are homeowners. It was really important to me. Like, it's so stupid and silly, but it was really important to me that I be able to draw my kids' heights on the wall, right? Like, I mean, I can even probably go on Amazon and get like one of those stupid strips and hang it on the wall and like mark all their stuff, and then we take it with us and we hang it somewhere else. But for some reason, I think maybe because I did it in my grandma's house and I always remember going over that wall and seeing how much I grew and stuff. And it was just nostalgia for me. And that was a really important thing to me when we bought a house. Also, given the market that we're in, it actually didn't make sense to rent because of what's called the homestead exemption here in Austin. So there were other reasons why it actually financially also made sense. So there are reasons why, emotionally you might want to, let's say, go buy a house versus rent. And that I think the problem is not whether or not you buy or rent, right? The problem is whether or not you don't take into account what you're getting yourself into. So if you've got all the numbers in front of you and you're like, look, you know what, homeownership is more expensive, but it makes sense for me given A, B, and C, then by all means go ahead, right? But if you don't ever even look at those numbers, then how do you know, right? And then you're just setting yourself up for potentially getting yourself in a financial situation that you couldn't necessarily afford and you didn't even really want.
Yeah. Was that a big move for you, moving from New York to Texas?
Yeah, it was a big move. Yeah, I've adjusted actually a lot easier than I thought I would. I'm like a Jew from New York, and I thought like, oh, I just like 70-degree weather all the time. Not that you get that in New York, obviously. But I thought like, oh, summer here is gonna be so hot. I'm not gonna like it. My hair's frizzy, all this stuff, And then and then actually I really like the summers because we spend a lot of time in like the lake or the pool, and it's just, yeah, I don't know. I feel like I live in a country club and it's really nice here. So and we were like cramped in an apartment, and then obviously COVID hit too. So we like feel like God was looking out for us all around,
I hear you. I'm a Jew from Long Island, New York. But I live in the Midwest now. And do you have any advice for people moving from one area of the country to another? And a lot of people happen to be moving from New York, Chicago, LA, San Francisco to Texas and Florida or wherever. But there seems to be some extra movement these days. Do you have any advice?
Yeah, for sure. I would say if you're close with your family, figure out a way to have it in your budget to either be able to travel to see them or be able to put them on a plane to see you. Because that for me was like the hardest part is I'm not around my family anymore. But I did take that into account when we bought our place. So what that might mean though, right, is in order for you to have money in the budget to do that, you don't buy as much house, or you rent a smaller apartment, right? So I mean, I think that like that's kind of a personal thing, whether or not, if you don't care about your family, right, then I mean, go do whatever.
Maybe some people
whatever you're going to do.
From family, huh?
Yeah, maybe you're trying to escape, so maybe you don't need a budget for them. But I don't know. I mean, for me, that was really, really important.
Yeah, no, I hear you. What about when you think about retirement? A lot of people, they want to retire tomorrow, and we're back to 5 days in the Bahamas, and then you're back at home, or what is the plan? How do you discuss with people like when they think about what retirement actually means for them? Not so much how much money they're going to need, and maybe that plays into it, but like, what are they going to do with their time, and are they going to be fulfilled? Are they going to actually want to stop working?
Yeah, I think that this is one of the hardest discussions that, well, it's the hardest thing that people have to really think out, because I think on the one hand, a lot of people want to retire early or retire in general, whether or not, retire even at a normal age, but retire, just because they hated what they were doing for so long. And so the question I always have for clients is, well, is the problem with what you're currently doing? Or is the problem that you're doing anything at all? So what often comes up for people is like, once you're at a normal full retirement age, the problem is that you're doing anything at all sometimes. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you completely retire and that you don't find anything to do, but it's like you want kind of a break. You want something different. Maybe you are really ready to play golf for the next 10 years. Maybe you are ready to do something a little bit less when you're, when you're in your late 60s going into your 70s and you just want to enjoy your golden years. And I think that that's totally fine and that you should still have a plan for what you're going to do with that time, because sitting on a beach in the Bahamas does get old really quickly. But for people who are younger, for people who are in their 30s or 40s or even in their 50s, the question is really more, do you actually want to stop working, or do you totally hate what you're doing now? And could you transition to something else that would make you happier so that you can get to that place where when you enter your golden years, things look a little bit different for you? And for most people, that is the answer, is that they really just need to be doing something else, or maybe they need to just be working less. So I found that a lot of people want to transition to either some sort of business ownership where they have more freedom with their time, or just more part-time work is pretty popular. Yeah. Where maybe they have time for side projects or other things, or I don't know, they have a hobby that they would really like to do, but they just really don't have time for it given their schedules, things like that.
Yeah. What's your take on the FIRE movement?
It's funny. I actually used to be a huge fan, and I'm not anymore. Oh. Which maybe is a controversial thing to say. I just don't think that people should be retired so young. And I don't think that you should be eating like beans and rice for the rest of your life so that you can go and then do nothing. What I found is like people have all these excuses about why they can't do the things that they love now. And the problem is really prioritization in your schedule. And less about the fact that, oh, I don't have time to make music in my garage, or I don't have time to do puzzles, or whatever it is that people want to do, right? I think that like, find the time, make the time, right? Like I don't have time either. I've got 2 businesses, I've got 2 kids, I've got all sorts of stuff going on all the time, but like I really like working out. So I make time to do it every week, throughout the week. And, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm doing it at the times I always want to be doing it, right? Like I would love to take a 2 p.m. workout every single day. No, I can't do that, right? Like it's just physically, it's not possible. So I work out at night, like, if I can, I'll do it in the morning, right? But I don't, there's sort of things where you just have to figure out how you can put it into your schedule to enjoy what you want to do now, rather than saying, okay, I need to scrimp and save every little penny and pretty much not enjoy my life so then I can go have a bunch of time. And what I've seen happen to a lot of these people is that they still don't make the time to do those things. They find other things to fill their time with, and they still procrastinate on the 5 things or 3 things that they said they were going to do if they had all the time in the world. And you know what? Like at the end of the day, it's like you have to be your own force of nature and find ways to do these things rather than trying to pick out all of the reasons why you can't do it related to whatever it is that you're doing now.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm kind of curious what you talk to people about, or clients about, like being in financial hell, and maybe you could describe what financial hell is like.
Yeah, so I've definitely worked with people who they've dug themselves a very deep hole, whether it be debt, whether it just be you're on some sort of hamster wheel that you can't seem to get off of from buying too expensive of a home, or committing to too high of rent. Committing to too high fixed expenses in general, like owning a home, owning an expensive car, owning a boat, all of those things, right? They start to add up all over time, and then it decreases the amount that's left over for savings. So for instance, let's say, I don't know, average person pays 25% of their income in taxes. You should also be saving about 20% of that. So that would be 45% of your income right away going to taxes and savings. And so you've got 55% of that left over. If you then spend half of that, right? And actually most people spend a lot more than that, right? But if you are spending somewhere between 35 and 44%, which is what they will lend to you, there's very little left over for what you can actually do. So what happens is that people stop saving, right? Because they generally pay their taxes, or maybe you're a business owner, you get behind. They don't decrease the large fixed expenses part, and they don't commit to the savings part. So you end up overspending, or worse, you end up like even beyond overspending your income, and now you're in debt. So I'm sure there are all sorts of different financial health scenarios that you can get yourself into. But I would say just like the large fixed expenses is one of those things where you are then committing to high income for however long you have that debt for, right? Or until you decide that you're going to sell that place. And for a lot of people, it might commit you to a job that you hate, right? And make you want to retire early, but then you can't retire early because you didn't put away any money, right? And there's a feedback loop that starts happening, where you can pretty much, you can create any financial hell that you want to, if you don't look at the numbers and assess how you can get out of it.
Right. How much do you think student loans are playing into financial health for people?
I think quite a bit. I think it depends on what you went for, it's usually a secondary degree that gets people in trouble, not the primary one, because there are limits on how much you can be lent to. And generally there's financial aid and other things that happen. So the debt from undergrad, it's not nothing, but it's minimal compared to what I've seen other people have. The average undergraduate generally comes out, I think it's like something around 32 or 35K in debt, which is a lot, but it's not it's like the difference between what the government had in debt in 2008 after they did the bank bailouts versus what the government has in debt now, right? Like going to undergrad, okay, we can get out of this situation. It's going to suck for a little bit, but you'll be okay, right? Now you're like, there's nothing I can do. I just need them to forgive my student loan debt, right? So that's like a degree, committing to a degree like psychology is a good example because it costs a lot of money, but you don't get paid very much when you come out. Occupational therapy, physical therapy, these that require highly specialized schooling, right? But you maybe don't necessarily make a lot of money, or if you get a law degree, but you don't get a high top 10 or top 100 paying law firm type of a job, it's going to be hard to get out from under that kind of a debt. And it definitely contributes to financial health for sure.
Yeah.
Because if you're giving, at least 10% or more of your income towards that debt, right, that even more shrinks the pie. And if you then also commit to high fixed expenses, you can see how easily you can get into credit card debt.
Yeah. And along the same lines, how do you advise people to think about weddings? And
so I don't like it when people spend on their weddings, but I also acknowledge that it's a very important day in people's lives. So so I don't actually remember what my rule of thumb is off the top of my head. I think it was that your investable assets are not in retirement accounts or other locked up accounts, money that you can touch now, that you shouldn't really take more than 10% of it, something like that. And generally, with my clients, we kind of do this on a per client basis, depending, some people's family members might contribute or other things, but kind of keeping to some sort of low end of a budget. And usually what I try to tell people is, hey, look at that 7.5% number, because the 7.5% number, you're going to go over it anyways. So you're probably going to end up at that 10 to maybe even 12% number, right? And it'll be okay. The thought, I feel like it's one of those things, right, where your financial health isn't necessarily contingent on, you overspending a little bit on your wedding, right? But starting your relationship with, the person of your dreams on the wrong financial footing is it's just asking for a problem, right? So if you're going to go out there and, go have one of those, MTV style weddings, and if you don't have the money for that kind of a wedding, then, you're asking for problems right at the beginning. And the honeymoon phase, it wears off, right? Anyone who's been married more than a couple of years knows that, things don't, nothing shines and glimmers as much as it does on your wedding day. So, and I love my husband and we're all great. So I don't want anyone to think that that's the case from this, right? But, everyone's got, you got highs and lows, it's kind of like a sine curve.
Yeah, it's a lifelong affair and you got to put a lot of work into it. It takes a lot of compromise, a lot of effort. But it's like anything else, you get what you put into out of it, what you put into it.
Yeah, for sure. I would say the same thing too with engagement rings, right? If the engagement ring is super important to you, maybe a smaller wedding is a better idea, right? Or maybe you're willing to not have the ridiculously expensive engagement ring, you get a CZ or whatever else. And then you can spend a little bit more on your wedding. Or maybe you really know you want to go buy that house, right? And you don't spend so much on either of those things because the house is more important. So again, everything is a trade-off. And financial planning is an art, not a science, right? There's only so much money in the pie. You have to choose where that money should go.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And maybe have the wedding in the backyard of the house.
Yeah.
What about combining finances?
Yeah. So my view on this is if you are married, you should be married. And this is a very controversial view nowadays. People like to be married singles. They like to do, I'm going to do me. I want my own bank account. I want to be able to spend money. I don't want my husband knowing when I'm going to buy him a gift is always the thing I hear. And it's like, okay, you buy your husband a gift once a year, or like the husband will say the same thing about their wife. Like you can't figure out a way to like not have them look at that credit card bill that month, maybe, oh, I'll check it this month, honey, don't worry. If you're going to be married, you need to look at things together. This is really hard for people, especially in this day and age, right? We get married later. We start lives with separate bank accounts. We don't immediately get married right out of school and then like go from living in a parent's house to living in a house with our spouse, right? There are a number of reasons why you would have a more complicated layer of finances entering into a relationship than people did many years ago. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't do the work to combine it. There are many ways to look at it. You could have completely separate finances. You could have this weird mishmash of sort of combined, sort of not. I don't recommend the middle one. I'm like, either keep it separate or have it to be together. But this weird mishmash in the middle is actually like, I think people's nightmares because like they don't really know what's going on in the financial picture. There's too many accounts and everything else. My vote is definitely for combining. I think that a good marriage means that you communicate well, that you do things together, and that you're not hiding other expenses or other things from each other. And the best way to do that is to be combined.
Yeah, I agree. It is the best way. I'm not really sure how the other ways work. Whether like they, do you go on separate vacations or to get different meals based on budgets. I think that's hard, but I'm not telling anyone not to. If you don't want to combine budgets or finances, I get it, but I don't necessarily understand it. And I think the best way is to actually have a full marriage of the finances and the love and the family. So I agree there. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, it can get complicated, right? Imagine you've been married, I don't know, like maybe you're entering it into a new marriage, but imagine now you've been married 15 years and you're still going halvesies at dinner. Is that how you want to live your married life?
Because if one person can afford a better halvesy.
Yeah. Or like, is that how you're going to do it? Like, one of you picks up the check every fourth time because one person makes more than the other. It's just at some point, like, are you doing this together or are you not?
Yeah, I think it's a lack of compromise, and it's possibly a result of maybe getting married later. And I don't know if it's necessarily just for the individual, but generationally, people are getting married later. And so there's a greater, I think, protection around the independence they've had longer.
Yeah.
And a reluctancy to give it up, maybe.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm never want to tell anyone how to live their life, but I think at the end of the day, like life in general is not about us as individuals. Right? Like we all live in the world with other people. We have families, we have friends, we have communities, right? Life is not just about us. So when we make things like marriage, which is something between two people, when we make that about just us, right? You're entering into a conflict before there is even a conflict, right? Because like there's two individuals now instead of a married couple, right? It's the same thing if you enter into a community and you're like, it's just me in this community, right? People aren't going to really like you in that community. You're not like, doing what everybody else in the community is. You're part of something, right? Either you're part of something or you're not. And if you think about it as everything is me, I think in some ways, right, it's a protection mechanism, but you miss out on a lot of like some of life's greatest things that it has to offer you.
Yeah. Kind of a double edged point. Your book kind of talks a lot about childhood trauma and how it can affect our relationship with money and our thoughts, behaviors, and actions. How do we raise financially successful kids?
Yeah, I love thinking about this, especially because I have two little ones, and I like obviously like to like input financial propaganda into their heads. And I was actually pregnant while I was reading the audiobook to my book. So I don't know if maybe eugenics is a thing or not, but like my thought is like, maybe my daughter got so much out of that. She's going to be this financial genius, but in lieu of that, right. In lieu of you like reading a financial book to your child in utero. The thing that I always come back to is what kind of child do I want my child, like what kind of adult actually do I want my child to ultimately become? And so when I think about that, right, I think about raising someone who's successful, right, who can do things on their own, who is determined, who is resilient, right? All of these things require me giving some trust over to my child and enabling them to do activities on their own. And I think this is really hard for parents, especially parents today, in the environment in which we live, where kids can't even like walk to the corner to get their own mail without like CPS being called, so it's really hard for parents to like let go and let a kid do something on their own. But the way I like to think about it is you teach your child by showing them how to do it. Then you do it, you watch that, you do it with them, and then you watch them do it, and then you let them go off and do it on their own. So it's kind of like a 4-step process. So if you yourself you're not really on good financial footing, right, it's going to be really hard for you to show a kid what you're doing, then do it with them, and then watch them do it, and then send them off to do it, right? So maybe there's some financial education that needs to happen on the behalf of the parents, but ultimately it starts with giving your kids chores and giving them responsibility, and then trusting them to do these things, whether, maybe they'll break a cup or a plate every now and then, but it is okay for them to use a normal plate rather than a plastic plate, right? At some point, like, they need to know how to tie their shoes without you doing it for them all the time. At some point, it's, there's a lot of convenience in the world of just, shoving your kids' shoes on, throwing them in the car. But at some point they need to be able to buckle their own seatbelt or, do basic things. And we can't expect them to be able to make really good financial decisions later in life if we're constantly doing things for them all along the way and not ever giving them the chance to learn these things on their own.
Yeah. Autonomy, figuring out things for themselves. I think it's very important. 95% of future young adults' future happiness is going to depend on 2 choices that they'll be making: who to spend their lives with and how they'll earn a living. Mitzi Perdue, that quote was in your book.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious what your advice would be for people who experience maybe a large windfall or a massive appreciation in their assets. Maybe things go parabolic in their portfolio.
How do you handle that? Right?
Yeah, how do you handle that? A huge change in, whether maybe someone passes on, you get a large inheritance, or, your business experiences great growth, or one of your assets, you get lucky with Bitcoin or something similar. What kind of advice or what have you seen? How does that affect people?
Yeah. So I like to come back to something that I think of quite often is when I've seen this in my practice and when I've heard about other people experiencing this, it's money makes you more of who you are. And money, I think people think that money will change them. And it kind of goes back to that question that we ask clients of how would your life be different if you had all the money in the world, right? But if you really sit down and think about it, if you've gotten a lot of things in your life already right, the big things don't really change in that question, because more money doesn't make you different. It doesn't make you a new person. It just means that you have more money, and then you end up doing sort of the same things that you're doing now with that new money. So for instance, I've seen clients who've gotten giant windfalls, the reason why they've hired me, but because they were used to living on, $50,000 a year, they continue to live on $50,000 a year, even though they could probably live on $500,000 a year, right? And it's just because that's who they are. They don't need more money. They maybe, maybe they decided to buy an Airstream or something else during the pandemic, even though they were completely out of stock because they could, and then they can go do more of what they were going to do, which is just go hike in a park, right? Like there's some people that they're just not spenders, and that's just not part of who they are. And then there are other people where if you gave them that windfall, they would completely squander it within the year. And then I guess it would obviously depend on how big that windfall was, how quickly they would squander it, right? But I think the thing to consider when you get something like that is, what kind of person am I? How do I think this money is going to change my life? What will be different as a result of me getting a windfall? And I like to use this example in my own life. So I did those 3 questions myself. And then I sat down with my husband one day and I was like, one day when we have all the money in the world, because obviously Bitcoin's going to go to $1 jillion, right? But I don't know when, so don't quote me on that. And maybe it won't, and maybe it'll go to 0. But if, that time comes, the only thing I'd really want different in our lives is I would want somebody to come and clean our house. Tired of cleaning our house. I want somebody to come and clean our house, right? I mean, like when you think about it in the grand scheme of things, right? If you've got billions upon billions of dollars, right? That's the only thing that you need to have change in your life. Like, I feel like my hope for everybody is that you could get to some sort of place like that where a windfall doesn't actually change you, right? It just can maybe improve a couple of little different things in your life.
Yeah, I think that speaks to making good choices. And I think that you like what you do. So I think, and that's wonderful. I'm kind of curious what your rabbit hole story is for Bitcoin.
Yeah, so I first read about Bitcoin in a Mises article when it was like $2. And I was working in traditional financial services, as I mentioned earlier. And so I was like, okay, well, how do you buy this thing? Because like I've always kind of had a libertarian bug. Um, and always like wasn't sure really about gold because when I looked at long-term returns on gold, they really only returned inflation, right? So it's not that exciting to invest in something that returns inflation. So then I looked into it and it was like, I don't know if maybe I was reading it wrong, but I had done many, many wires by this point in my career. So I looked at it and I was like, I had to wire money to Mt. Gox in Japan to this random address that didn't have an account associated with me. And that like freaked me out. I was like, what is this crazy scammy thing, whatever? Like, I don't know, this weirdo who wrote this article on Mises. Okay. And then I just forgot about it and didn't think about it again until I met my husband, then boyfriend, obviously, but where he started talking about it and it was like all he would talk about. And then I was like, I remember that article and I looked at the price and I was like, oh, wow. It, like 10x from from when I had read that article. And then by then, like Coinbase had existed and local Bitcoins was still a thing back then. And so it just kind of made sense with my background. I've always been interested in Austrian economics and really like responsible actions with your money and people taking charge of their own lives. So I think and low time preference and all of that stuff really falls in line with like how I view financial planning and how I arrange my life and everything else. So it was a good fit, I guess.
Yeah, that's awesome. My final question for you is if you had to move or sell your house or anything like that, would you sell the chairs or would you bring them with you?
We don't own any chairs. I don't know what you're talking about.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, I'm not sitting on a chair right now.
I'm assuming you only have 4 chairs max in the whole house. You just move them around.
Yeah, no, actually, we make our daughter sit on my lap, so we've only got 3 chairs. When she gets a little bit bigger, we'll get a 4th chair, and then maybe we'll bring it with us. I don't know, we'll see, or we'll just sit on the floor. Actually, it's funny you say that. So my parents recently bought. They were planning on retiring, and they bought a place, but they haven't actually sold their old place yet, and they haven't really moved anything in. And they said to me, they were like, "Okay, so can you drop a few things off at our house, so that when we come and visit you, we don't have to sit on the floor?" And I was like, actually, you can sit on the floor. But no, I dropped them off 2 club chairs and a Costco table. And they ended up actually sitting on the floor most of the time. They had like some friends over and they all sat around the living room with no furniture, like they were in college.
That's awesome. I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this conversation, Morgan. Please, let everyone know where they can find you. And, the floor is yours if you have any parting words and we didn't cover anything that you were hoping to get at.
Yeah, so this has been amazing. Thank you for having me on. So yeah, you can find me on Twitter. I'm at Morgen with an E Rochard. I also have a podcast, which I haven't done in a while, admittedly, called Money Owners Podcast. You can find that at money_owners. Pierre and I are now doing a podcast called Bitcoin for Advisors, and we admittedly also don't do that one as often. And I have to say, because I started doing that and we have so much fun chit-chatting with each other, it's actually made Money Owners kind of boring. I went to record something for Money Owners and I was like, it's kind of sad. I'm just talking to myself in the wall again. Like, so I ended up scrapping that one, even though I am planning to do another Money Owners podcast at some point. My book is on Amazon. It's the Quick Start Guide to Personal Finance. And yeah, if you want to have a question answered on any of the shows, feel free to submit them. You can go to the Money Owners website and you can either click on Ask Morgan and fill in the form, or you can just holler at me on Twitter. And we're always looking for questions and things to help people make really good decisions about financial planning or Bitcoin or whatever else it is that's part of your financial life.
Yeah, I can't thank you enough. This has been so dope. The book is fantastic. It really does, help people, I think, eliminate financial stress because it covers everything. It helps you think about building wealth and, achieving financial freedom, which is, I think, why we're all here. So thank you so much. I really appreciate this.
Thank you.
Morgen Rochard on life decisions, financial planning, and holding the line on chair ownership right here on the Bitcoin Matrix podcast. This episode was brought to you by Ledin, Bitcoin Magazine, and the Bitcoin 2022 conference. Ledin.io is a secure, simple, and easy-to-use platform for managing and growing your digital wealth. If you want to see what it's all about and get $50 free in USDC when you take out your first Ledin loan, head over to start.ledin.io/Bitcoin Matrix. Last year, over 10,000 Bitcoiners came to celebrate Bitcoin at Bitcoin 2021. But for Bitcoin 2022, organizers are expecting tens of thousands of rabid Bitcoiners. It's going to be off the hook, and I can't wait to see you there and grab that beer. For 10% off, use my code Cedric2022 and check the show notes for the link and more details. And thank you for listening. If you dig the chats, please make sure to subscribe, rate, review, and share with your friends and family. Stack sats, stay humble, and stay laser focused. This is Cedric. Peace.